Some people build bigger arms with 2 sets a week, others do 12. Some train to absolute failure every session, others avoid it completely, and somehow all of them get results. So how does that work? Because if growing arms is supposed to be simple, why have most people been training for months or years without the arms they actually want? I was in that position myself years ago, doing everything I was supposed to do. Multiple exercises, tracking sets and reps, never missing a session, and my arms weren't growing the way I wanted them to. Meanwhile, I knew lads doing what looked like half the work and getting twice the results. It made no sense until I figured out what I'd been focusing on wrong the whole time. So in this video, I'm going to show you what that was and why most people never work it out. I've been a personal trainer for 11 years, trained myself for over 14, and the clearest way I can show you what I mean starts right there. And to explain why simple is actually the answer, I need to tell you what my arm training looked like for the first several years because it's probably going to sound quite familiar. I did everything I was supposed to do. Multiple curl variations every session, barbell curls, dumbbell curls, cable curls, hammer curls, concentration curls. I read that hitting the bicep from different angles was the key, so I built sessions around covering every angle possible. I was leaving every session with a massive pump, thinking the work was done, but the arms weren't really changing the way I expected, given how much direct work I was putting in. And I kept adding more exercises, more sets, more variations, because more felt like the logical answer when things weren't moving fast enough. So here's what I eventually figured out, and it took embarrassingly long. I was putting in a lot of effort, but not the right kind of effort. The pump makes you feel like something is happening every session. The volume makes it feel like you're doing really good work and you're doing a lot of it, but I wasn't actually pushing hard enough in any individual set to give the muscle a real reason to grow, because I was managing my energy across 15 sets rather than putting everything into 5 genuinely hard ones. And here's the thing about the volume versus intensity debate that nobody actually says clearly. It's not volume versus intensity, it's whether you're training hard enough and whether you're doing it consistently with the right form over time. That's the whole thing, because everything else, the number of sets, the exercise selection, the frequency, is pretty much secondary to those two things being in place. And the training structure I'm about to describe is built into the Softer Lean program in the description. It's 3 full body sessions a week, built for people who don't want to spend hours in the gym. It's completely free. So here's why both sides of that debate have people with great abs. And of course this works for people who are natural, like myself, or people who are enhanced. And also why it's not confusing once you understand what's happening. High volume works because more sets means more total stimulus for the muscle, assuming each set is pushed hard enough. If you're doing 12 sets of curls and each set is genuinely challenging, the muscle is getting a significant amount of growth signal across the session. Low volume works because if you take 1 or 2 sets genuinely to failure, not stopping when it gets uncomfortable, actually grounding out every rep until you physically can't, those sets can provide enough stimulus on their own without needing more sets behind them. So the variable that actually determines which approach works isn't the number of sets, it's how hard you're pushing in each one. Most people doing high volume aren't pushing each set hard enough, so they need more sets to get enough total stimulus. Most people doing low volume aren't actually going to failure, they're stopping when it feels hard rather than when it's actually impossible. And both of those people are getting less from the training than they should be. The simplest way I've found to think about it, 2 or 3 sets per exercise, taking genuinely close to failure on each one, but not so many sets that you're rationing intensity, not so few that one bad set means the session was wasted. Enough to get the stimulus, few enough to actually push each one properly. And here's the thing that determines whether any of this produces results over the long term. And it's the same thing that determines results in every other part of the training, which is progressive overload. I'm sure you've heard of it. The weight in your logbook, in other words, the way you're tracking your lifts, needs to go up over time. If you're doing the same curls with the same weight for the same reps that you were doing 6 months ago, your arms are going to look exactly the same as they did 6 months ago. The muscle has no reason to change because nothing is asking it to change. And without the weight going up, nothing actually changes regardless of how much you're doing. This is the thing I missed for years. I was adding more exercises instead of adding more weight to the exercises I was already doing. And adding exercises gives you more to do without actually making your body do anything harder. A client here is a good example of this. He'd been training arms for years, always had a good pump after every session, but the weight hadn't moved in months. Once we dropped the extra curl variations and locked in progressive overload on 2 or 3 movements over the week, his arms started changing changing within a few weeks. Same time in the gym, just the right things actually progressing. Track the weights, push them upward over time. That's pretty much the whole system. And here's what I'd actually use, because the principle is simple, but the exercise selection does matter more for arms than most of the muscle groups, specifically because of the stretch position. So for biceps, my favorite and the ones I've seen the most progress on for biceps are preacher curls. The reason preacher curls work so well comes down to where the bicep is actually under load. The preacher bench locks the arm in position where the bicep is under load at the bottom of the movement, which is the fully stretched position. As you can see, I prefer to do it with dumbbells, a single arm at a time. Most standard curls let the tension drop off at the bottom because the elbow can drift forward and cheat the range of motion almost. But the preacher bench makes cheating structurally impossible. The arm is fixed. The bicep has to do the work from the very bottom of the movement, and the stretch at the bottom is where the growth stimulus is the highest. And the first time I used the preacher bench properly all those years ago, actually controlling the weight all the way down and holding the bottom, I felt my bicep working in a completely different way to anything I'd done before, and I had DOMs for days. And that's when I understood what I'd been missing. One detail worth adding as well, by the way, at the top of the movement, turn the pinky slightly upward. That supination engages the bicep fully at the contracted position in a way a neutral grip doesn't really do. It's a tiny little change at the top of the movement, but it does actually make quite a bit of difference, and you really do feel that contraction in the bicep at the top. And it's a small thing, but it adds up over time. Take these close to failure as well. The rep range that works well for me is around 10 to 15. Heavy enough to be meaningful, high enough to get volume through the full range of motion. And when you hit 15 clean reps, go up on the next session in terms of weight. Okay, so now we're moving on to triceps. My favorite exercise is overhead tricep extension. The tricep makes up roughly 2/3 of the upper arm. Most people spend more time on biceps, which make up the other third, and then wonder why their arms don't look like the way they want. The overhead position matters specifically because of the long head of the tricep. The long head crosses the shoulder joint, which means it only gets a proper stretch when the arm is raised above the body. Although most standard exercises work the muscle but don't put the long head in a stretch position. But the overhead extension does, and the stretch under load is where the most growth happens. Cable overhead extensions or dumbbell overhead extensions, if you prefer that, both work. Full stretch at the top, where you feel the tricep lengthening, controlled all the way through. Squeeze at the end as well and try and get full extension. Usually I'll do around 3 sets, close to failure, as always, weight going up over time. But here's the thing that ties both of these exercises together, which is the stretch position. For the preacher curls, it's at the bottom. For the overhead extension, depending on the angle you are, it's the other way. Most people rush through both of these positions because they feel harder, but that difficulty is the whole reason your biceps or triceps are going to grow. For example, at the bottom of a preacher curl, especially when the fatigue starts to kick in, it's really bloody difficult to get that dumbbell up. Same with the tricep extension. Make sure that your form doesn't go on that part. And here's what most arm training content leaves out completely, because not everyone should be training the same way. If you're relatively new to training and recovering well, do slightly higher volume. 4 to 5 sets per exercise will probably produce faster results because your body is highly responsive to new stimulus and can handle more total work. If you're in your late 30s or 40s, training around a demanding job and real life, kids, etc., low volume with higher intensity is almost certainly more suitable and more productive. 2 to 3 genuinely hard sets per exercise rather than 5 moderate ones is going to be better. The recovery capacity changes, and training to match it rather than against it produces better results over the long term, at least I've found with the majority of my clients. If you're carrying a niggle or an injury or dealing with elbow tendonitis, for example, something that comes up a lot with the people I coach, and I've suffered with it as well, the preacher bench specifically reduces the stress on the elbow joint compared to free weight curls because the upper arm is supported through the whole movement and you can go a little bit lighter. And it's worth knowing if standard curls have been aggravating something anyway. And here's the bit that ties all this together. The principle doesn't change. Push hard, track the weight as always, and let it go up over time, or whether that's weight or reps. And remember, the Softer Lean program in the description has the full training structure these fit inside. It's built for people who don't want to spend hours in the gym. It's completely free. So the best arm training program isn't the highest volume or one with the lowest volume. It's the one you can recover from, push genuinely hard on, and stick to consistently enough for progressive overload to compound over time. But here's what most people find once the arm training is simplified and the progressive overload is actually happening. The arms that haven't changed in months start to actually move, but the arms sit on a frame. And if the frame around them isn't developed properly, even well-trained arms, you can do all the arm days in the world, but your body won't quite look the way it should. So I've got a video that covers exactly which muscles build that frame and why almost nobody trains them directly. Somewhere over here, so watch it next.